I'm going to welcome you all again. Thank you for joining. Today's session, as I said, is cleaning for Copilot readiness. Our objective is to share the recommendations, share the lessons so far, what we have seen from implementations and customer experiences of implementing Copilot, and what role does data classification, data governance, data hygiene play from moving uh, an intent to starting the adoption and consumption. I'm joined today by my colleague, Brian Tumler, who will be running most of the session today. Brian is Chief Product Officer at InProtection. He's very kind to kind of wake up quite early for us today. And I've spoken before in the previous webinars. I'm based in UK. My name is Vivek, and I'm Chief Technology Officer at InProtection. I will be speaking for the second half of the session where I will share some lessons learned and customer case studies and leave you with some call to action and tips from our practical experiences. Okay, a quick introduction to InfoTection. We are a global company, hugely specializing in information governance, data governance, and we are a Microsoft partner. We are specialized in modern work security and also Copilot implementations. And in addition to helping customers and advising customers on implementations, InfoTection also has an add-on to Microsoft Purview, which we will talk about a little bit later on when I come to do my part of the section in this webinar. Before I hand over to Brian, I wanted to start by saying that Copilot is um, is observing a significant moment right now, creating a lot of discussions in our community, and we see both excitement and concerns. We also see that there's a lot of stats coming out, a lot of analytics and insights coming from Microsoft, from Gartner, and lots of other industry-leading research institutes, and we thought it would be a good idea to share some of those with you. And just very quickly, I wanted to pick just on two things, which where we are kind of seeing Copilot is delivering its value, or at least has the promise to deliver its value. Is one is knowledge extraction and knowledge creation, and it really is creating a new branch in the space of knowledge management. And some of the insights which have come in from working with Microsoft, other industry leaders, and also our own assessments of having done some pilots with Copilot, is approximately 18% of organizations believe that in the next 12 months, um, the employee productivity will be improved by use of Copilot. But we also have seen in 2024, with all the work that we have done, the 60% of the organizations who tried to implement Copilot or even pilot with Copilot took 3+ months longer than they had planned because they underestimated the amount of remediation which was required in order to embed and address all the risks associated with Copilot. And we are also noticing that about 26% of organizations have decided to upgrade their Microsoft 365 platform to an add-on governance solution or a Microsoft add-on product, which has the capability to accelerate the improvements Microsoft 365 needs in order to embed Copilot, in order to apply all the governance controls, security controls, data protection controls, which are required. Otherwise, it will take a lot longer for them to extend the coverage of governance to all of their data within Microsoft 365. So those are some of my top picks from the stats, which we have available to hand. And now I will hand over to Brian, who will share from his vast experience of data governance, data security, etc. Long before Copilot was in existence, but Copilot is definitely now shining a light on the urgency where we see that organizations need to do something about this particular topic.
Thank you, Vivek. Yeah, it's you stole some of my thunder because I was thinking I've been doing large volume unstructured content cleanup for 20 years now, long before Copilot came along. But a lot of the same rules and concepts and theories that we used back then are still appropriate and still usable. Like I said, we want to do this in a shorter period of time, so the time frame's a little different, but understand that a lot of things that we do around what we're going to talk about today is ongoing. It's you want to do some stuff early before you get into Copilot, but there's no reason that you should stop it because it'll continue on and grow for the rest of your organization's history. So these are good concepts to keep in mind and move forward. Um, Quick shout out to everybody else that's in the Pacific time zone, California or Seattle or wherever. You're going to watch the sunrise over my shoulder. So it's a nice morning for doing this. Emerging risks that we're seeing. So we have very frequently jumped into clients that have started things like use cases and pilots around Copilot, trying to figure out what they want to use. And what they're very frequently finding is that the IT organization is really eager to get as much content in there as possible and do things as possible. The problem is that the people in the risk department and the legal department are sort of looking over their shoulders going, oh my gosh, what are we doing? How are we getting into this situation where we're exposing all this content? The real big risks that we're looking at is really the source of the information that's going into Copilot and what that means for confidence and whatever inaccuracies might be in there. That's a big part of what we're going to talk about today is how do you make sure that what you're putting into Copilot as a little black box, when it comes out the other side, it has the good, valuable information that you need, and make sure that you're not adopting a bunch of sprawl that really doesn't add a whole lot of value to where you're going. One of the things, and you'll see this theme pop up a number of times in these slides, is Copilot sees everything. We tend to not see things after a while because they're hidden, buried deep within folder structures or in sites that have gone inactive or a variety of places that we just, because we're not there all the time, we forget that that information's there. Copilot doesn't have that restriction and it finds things that really surprise us a lot of times. So understand that there's a lot out there we want to get our hands around and figure out how to move forward. Go ahead, Vivek. So I went and asked a large language model, basically, what are the top strategic reasons why we want to be using um, uh, generative AI? I think it's an interesting thing. A lot of the use cases that our clients are coming up with tend to be very tactical and maybe productive, but not necessarily strategic. So yes, it does a great job at summarizing emails. It does a great job at listening to your meeting and capturing the words that come out of it. It does a great job at some of these things which really don't have a lot of strategic value to them. What I wanted to point out here was a couple things. First is look at the words that are coming out at the beginning. This is the response I got from the large language model. What's important? Market analysis and forecasting. You can use generative AI for that. Competitive intelligence, innovation and R&D, and policy and strategy formulation. Now, the thing to think about and what's really valuable to concept into this whole process, particularly if you're one of those people that likes categorizing information. So if you're a records manager or an information protection analyst and you're trying to put things into the right kinds of buckets, think about your market analysis. If your large language model is going back 10, 15, 20 years to find data to give you a market analysis or a forecast, that's really not going to be doing a lot of good for you. Same thing with competitive intelligence. Think back about 5 years about who your competitors were and what they were doing, and does that have any impact on the way you're moving forward today? Chances are not. With innovation and R&D, if you're trying to build new products and new concepts and new services based on the things that were important and valuable that you did 5, 10, 15 years ago, that's a bit of a problem. Same with policy and strategy information. So what we want to kind of focus on is get the stuff out of the way that if you had it in your system and Copilot's presenting it to you as being a valid option, it says it very confidently, and you don't always know whether or not it's even accurate. So in order to increase that confidence and that accuracy in the information you're producing for your strategic value initiatives here, what we want to do is do a little categorization, a little cleanup, make sure that we're not putting stuff into it, putting the garbage into it so that we don't get the garbage out from the other side of things. Next slide, please. So basically, it's a high level thing. First is we're going to remove the unvaluable stuff, rot analysis, rot remediation. If you've gone through and you have a file analysis tool that you've used over the past 10, 15 years, understand that there is some real value in that. We want to remove expired records, outdated information, and anything that doesn't have content in it that's not going to add value. But then we want to take it a couple steps further and do identify and protect the sensitive stuff. So the sensitive information that's out there either wants to be, if it's internally and you have the right security, wants to be promoted because that's the important stuff that you're collecting. Those are your business decisions that have a lot of value. There's also privacy data, which we want to protect from getting released inappropriately, and really promoting the good stuff. Find out where the value is, where the accurate transactions are, the recent stuff, and make sure that that's what Copilot is accessing to make the decisions and content that is generating for you. Next slide. Now, I can't do a presentation without this slide. This is the information governance reference model. It's part of the EDRM reference model. Basically, what it's saying is for information governance, which is really what we're trying to do here, it's important to bring in perspectives from all of these different disciplines. This is not an IT project. It's not a legal project. It's not a business project. It's all of these combined because what you'll see, and Vivek, click the mouse, when we do any sort of information governance project, we have to reach into and find out why it is that the business wants to keep things for a specific period of time. Records management wants to keep it even shorter because they're concerned about legal risk. Privacy people have a really important perspective on what do we prevent from going outside. And so how long we keep things, what kind of access we give to things, all of these things which are critical to Copilot have a perspective from each of these different disciplines. We want to make sure they're included in this process. So if you're going forward with the IT department only doing use case studies, understand that these other people are sitting, looking over your shoulder, being a little worried about things. So next slide, please. So like I said, we've been doing this for a while. One of the things that we found out, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see there's a lot of things that might initiate a project around cleaning up content, and whether it's shared drives or SharePoints or in your OneDrives, wherever that data is, there's a lot of things that we've been doing that cause information governance issues in this whole process. I think one of the most important takeaways from this is if what you're doing is cleaning up and only cleaning up for the sake of cleaning up, you're not really doing anything strategic, and it's hard to get the support. It's hard to get the finances. It's hard to get the tooling. It's hard to make a really good set of decisions around how you want to move forward. So really, if you're going to be doing this, and now's the perfect time, if you're going to be looking at Copilot, this is your reason and purpose for going into trying to figure out how to clean up this information. And when you do that, understand that all of these other things that are on this list will also benefit from the fact that you're doing this cleanup. So it's not a standalone cleanup only for Copilot. Keep these concepts in mind for all these other things that you're trying to accomplish. Next slide. So the real issue is that in large corporate spaces, like I said, there's stuff that we put in folders, put in a site, put in a team somewhere that sits and sits and sits until everybody's forgotten that it's there. And one of the big surprises that happens a lot with Copilot, with the various use cases that are popping up, is how did it get that information? Why did it say that? How are we exposing this? Where is that information? And that's a problem because it's hard to know where that stuff is. And so that's what our technical solutions are trying to solve more than anything else, is finding where is that information? What do we have that we need to know about? Also understand that nobody in your organization really knows what a record is. So we want to be doing things like auto classification and logical placement strategies around where content goes so that we can actually apply the records management and know how to get rid of the content without really relying necessarily on individuals to know that stuff. But they can participate, and some of them will know, and some will have a lot of perspectives on it. Information throughout your organization is not uniformly protected. It may be very safe in this site. It may not be safe in this site. It may be very unsafe in a shared drive. So different levels of security all over the place. Importance, value, and accuracy and risk change over time. It may have been really important when you created it, but over the last 10 years, 5 years, strategies have changed, people have changed, rules have changed, and therefore the content changes in its value. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you're doing things. But really, most importantly in this whole process is that we want to bring the content to the solution. We want a solution that integrates with where your content resides, and that's really what a big part of Copilot is. The work in your organization is done in M365, and so having a knowledge source that feeds from that into what you're doing is really extremely valuable to have that connection. Um, and then the same tools that you use to evaluate your legacy content are really the same tools, because it's in M365, that you're going to use to evaluate future content. So if we build a set of rules that say this is what we define as important or not important or dangerous or whatever the classifications are, if you're looking at shared drives, which we can do with our tooling, if you're looking at SharePoint sites, if you're looking at team sites, for the legacy content that's out there, it also applies to all future content that you're putting in there. It doesn't have to, but it can. And that's, I think, really one of the big things, is that you're not building it for a one-time project, getting out of the way, but also how does this apply to what we do in the future? Next slide, please. This is really the high level approach that you want to do towards anything about getting your content into a Copilot or any of those other knowledge management type entities. First of all, identify and inventory your repositories to know what murky pools of dark unstructured data that you have. You want to extract as much information from the files to facilitate your understanding and classification. So our tools will go through and find things, not just the name of the file, but the file extension, the location of the file, content that's within the file. How does it relate to other things, using cognitive services for extraction of all kinds of information? Then do the analysis, understand the age, the ownership, the format, classify things according to your retention schedule, your information protection schedules, whatever classification structures you want to add. And I'm going to suggest some new ones for you in just a second. Review what this means with the business owners so that you're compliant and you're defensible, and then act upon it. And don't just sit there and say, okay, well, we now know that we've got a lot of duplicates. Do something about it. Figure out the right ways to act upon your content so that we can remove it, get it out of the way, and do something intelligent with it. So those are the 6 steps towards getting to that. Next slide. So this is an average of multiple Fortune 20 companies that we've worked with in the past. So these numbers may not fit within your scenario. But understand also, this is as far back in the food chain as we can get. So this is where we're starting with on shared drives. What we find is there's really 4 main categories. There's at the bottom stuff that you really want to optimize, but maybe not move into the cloud, not make available for your Copilot. It's things like systems, applications, structured data, multimedia. Some of that may be important, but not all of it is. Most of it, you just want to find the best place to save it for security and performance. Stuff on the left in the orange is stuff you want to remove. That's the garbage, the duplicates, the abandoned stuff. We have lots of rules and ways to find that. That tends to be about 25% of what's out there. Some stuff we want to convert, not really going to describe that too much. It's things like templates. And then finally, on the right-hand stuff, of the stuff that we'd want to migrate to or make available to something like a Copilot, there's static information and collaborative information. Only a subset of that really wants to make it into a Copilot because it has valuable, reusable, strategic information in it. It saves you a lot of time and effort if you can avoid the 60% on the left and only focus on the 40% on the right. Cut down what you want to try and address, figure out how to filter it on the way in or filter it on the way out so that you don't have to get that in the way. In a large part of that saves you money because you're not storing it in places that you don't need to store it, or worry about the transaction costs from putting it into a cloud-based solution that charges on the wrong things. So next slide. To take that a step further, like I said, that was shared drives. That doesn't mean that only shared drives are what we're interested in here, obviously. There's Exchange, there's a lot of people are taking right now information that's on shared drives and lifting and shifting into a cloud location like an Azure storage. If you do that, you're taking along all the garbage along with it. And that's sort of the problem. We find that natively, we don't add a lot of garbage to things like Exchange and SharePoint Online. And you can see some of the various types that are out there. For the first 3, obviously, you're going to find in all locations. We don't find a lot of temporary files per se. So TMP file extensions, for example, you wouldn't find them in an email or a SharePoint. They just don't exist there. Applications databases are things that you build and test and run on shared drives. They will be in a Azure location if you've lifted and shifted everything, and they probably won't work in that new location. So if you're going to be going through, for example, a cloud-based Azure file system or a AWS where you've loaded and lifted all this content, you're going to have a lot of the garbage that's out there that's ready to be addressed and removed. If you're only looking at SharePoint Online to get to that content, there's less things that you need to worry about, but there's still important records that we can filter out. The sensitive information is going to be there that we want to remove. So that's understand that these different technologies have different types of garbage and value in them, and we want to look at it that way. Another way to look at Vivek, click the slide, please. We also find this, you'll notice on the left is C drives at the bottom. As it goes toward the right, we're going from C drives to OneDrives to shared drives to SharePoint. As we move in that direction, we expect to find different types of information in those locations. So a lot of our corporate high value content is going to be in the SharePoint Online environments. Duplicates go down because it's shared. We're less likely to need duplicates. Administrative and in-process work is generally done on C drives and moves to the right as we live. So as we're deciding about looking at what is your Copilot looking at, if it's going to OneDrives to find answers to things, it's going to find a lot of more administrative in-process work and less high-value content than if you were to be focusing on SharePoint. So understand that your location has different personalities and you expect to find different things at different places. All right, next slide. So how do we go about doing this? Here is sort of the tactical first steps on doing a cleanup process. The first is understand your starting point. Understand how much data you have. What are you looking at? What are your systems? How much garbage is there? How much value is there? How many records are there? All of that is sort of the initial triage of your locations and understanding what you want to look at. And you'll find a lot of the tooling that we're putting out is really geared towards getting an understanding of not just your SharePoint, but all of your Microsoft work streams as well as cloud-based storage and on-premise storage. Next thing is to determine what your rules and your roles are. There's some opportunities to expand your retention schedule, which I'll talk about in just a slide or two. We really want to make sure that we're still going to preserve and protect legal holds. So if we're if we're interested in getting rid of content, we still want to do it compliantly. We're still going to make sure that we're not deleting anything that's part of your records retention program, which is part of the reason we need litigation involved in this process to make sure that we're being appropriate in the way we're doing things. Understand if you've done if you're doing a shared drive or if you're doing a lift and shift from an Azure cloud storage, put away the apps. These are putaways, not throwaways, but putaways your apps, your databases, your compound documents, your web content, and your exceptions, because they're harder to deal with, and it's harder to figure out what that content means when it's in a SharePoint, and therefore what it really means and what impact it'll have on your Copilot implementation. Anything that really needs to be protected, we either isolate it or we label it. Once it's labeled, if it becomes part of the Copilot graph database, we can do things with it to make sure that it's either protected appropriately or promoted appropriately or isolated appropriately. But you can do that ahead of time. So if it's a bunch of information that you really don't want to ever have in Copilot, get rid of it or put it someplace that's isolated. Make sure that the security is in place to make that happen. Cleanup really basically means we want to make enterprise-wide decisions on things. How do we get rid of duplicates? Sometimes we have to say, let's create a policy that says we're going to get rid of duplicates. So you have a chance to do that first as a user within your organization. That makes it more compliant. But we want to make uniform decisions and unified decisions that everybody sort of buys into. If you're getting to the point where you're asking individuals within your organization, can I keep this document? You're doing it wrong, because we're going to have way too much volume for that. So keep it at a high level, keep it at a process that's defensible, and we can figure out what to do. And like I said earlier, make sure you're also addressing those larger information governance issues. Do you have a problem in general with migrations or protections or all of the other information governance things that we're able to address by this cleanup, by this classification process? Next slide. Things that make it defensible. So we don't want to just delete things. This is for, once again, the business or the IT that wants to throw everything away or throw everything into Copilot. We need to be a little more defensible than that. So systemized deletion processes, implementing consistent approaches. If you can make things happen the same way all across the board in all of your systems, it's easier to defend in a court of law to say we did it appropriately, we did it defensively. It includes approvals for the rules that you built, and making sure that you're fitting in with whatever policies that you have, what are the processes that are in there. Do human validation so that you're not just trusting the technology. And that's also true with your Copilot output, is make sure that there's a human being validating the accuracy of what's coming out of Copilot until you know that you've got that down and you know what you're doing and you know what the audits are, you know what the results are. So, and then finally, audit trails to work to see what's been done, what did you do, how did you get there. Those are all things that help make all this a very defensible process. Next slide. I'm going fast. You can see the sun coming up, hopefully. I hope you're still with us. A few things I wanted to throw about duplicates. It's one of those things that people say, I want to get rid of duplicates right off the bat. Duplicates don't change the accuracy of your Copilot, because if you've got two documents that say the same thing, it's not going to know or care or distinguish between the two of those. But understand you're still processing that. You're still going through that effort. It takes time, takes resources, takes energy. A lot of the stuff that we call duplicates is also just garbage. If you're duplicating a useless piece of something or other multiple times, all of those things could be considered just regular garbage, trivial information that you don't need. If it's also duplicates, get rid of it. It's easier to do that. In average, there's 3 documents per duplicate set. Changes that in the organization, some areas will have multiple documents per duplicate set. 15% of the duplicates can't be deleted because they're really part of what we call a unified record. They're the terms and conditions that's in the same folder as the contract, but not really the same document. You'll find a lot of terms and conditions, standard terms and condition boilerplates located in a lot of places. You'll find a lot of your company logo built into a lot of locations. Very often they're referenced in other places. If you deleted them, all of those other things that try and reference that file will also crash, not work appropriately. So 85% of duplicates are created by humans, 15 by systems. So if you figure out what systems are creating duplicates, it's a good time to stop them. And then storage level deduplication really doesn't benefit productivity or backups or e-discovery or retention management. It does save on storage. So high level duplicates. Next slide. So here's where the classification really falls in. We've talked about the fact that we have a retention schedule, we have an information protection schedule. The other thing you can add to this is to say, let's do a Copilot schedule, which is to say, of all the content that I have in my organization, some of it's in the retention schedule and clearly defined. And if I've got the ability right now to deploy labels or to do auto classification to define what those records are within my corpus, that's a great thing. But we've built that based on business value and legal value. There's also Copilot value, and we can build and add new classification categories if that's appropriate in your organization to say, here's some other things that otherwise would be left out, but we think they're important for our use cases. Build classifications around them. Understand that that's another facet that you can deal with. So look for content that has real value. So research, strategy, specifications, standards, legal documents. A lot of that is good, rich knowledge that's very valuable to reuse and repurpose wherever you can. That's where the strategic value comes in. Transactional data that has no reusable value. So transactional data could be, some of it is quite usable, and Copilot is very good at creating data-related structures as well as content-related structures. So don't just assume that because it's transactional, it's not value. But for example, capturing everybody's I-9 forms for immigration purposes probably doesn't going to add a lot of value to anything, and it also introduces risks. So decide which of your categories that you've already figured out, if you have, which ones are valuable or not valuable or potentially harmful. We tend to keep things about projects or products or activities, whether or not they've failed, because we put them into a record category saying this is a project. Sometimes it's valuable to go through and say, is there any other metadata that we're tracking about those individual projects within that record category or information classification category that helps you separate out what is good versus not good? And if you can remove the failed projects and the failed products and the failed activities from that set, you're less likely to reintroduce those decisions into the future. Leverage your sensitivity labels. If you've done information protection and you've got sensitivity labels to know what is out there, what is your valuable intellectual property? Should it be included or not? That's really the focus, I think, of a lot of what this is. Look for groups or individuals that you know are the brains of the organization. What groups are creating valuable information? If it's your manufacturing department, focus on that as being where you want to refocus your capture and reuse of that knowledge that you're creating in your Copilot. So high level ways to sort of go beyond what your current classifications are, figure out if there's valuable information there and how you want to move forward with it. Next slide. So this is my last slide. Every project has different goals. Understand what your goals are before you start. Look at the high level things, figure out how we want to prioritize. As I said, delete first, put away second, organize third, and if necessary, migrate fourth. Your shared drives are organized. So there is value in the information that's in your old SharePoint sites, in your old team sites, in your old shared drives, and in the AWSs and Azures that are out there. There is value in there. We tend to think of it as landfill, and so we should just get rid of it. But there's really structure in that that we can leverage and take advantage of. Content is as valuable as context. So what it is as valuable as how it got there and what it means, why it is where it is. Um, we talked about large volumes do take a while to deal with. So this is an ongoing process. You're not going to see Copilot come in, be installed, and never do anything again. It's now part of your organization, part of your knowledge management. And so the cleanup process can continue and create job security while you're moving forward with all of these other activities. And don't let perfection be the enemy of good. If you can make a decision now based on something that makes a lot of sense, your overall value will increase in your Copilot. And that's really what we're after in the circumstances. So don't get stuck arguing over the minutia that's out there. Focus on the big picture, bigger strategies, and work differently from that. And so I'm going to hand this over to Vivek, who's going to talk about um, a variety of technologies and directions and things that we're seeing in our clients.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. I'm going to pick on the last point, which Brian said, perfection. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And that sort of is what we are hearing from lots of other industry experts as well, including Microsoft, on enabling small steps. You may have heard a lot about crawl, walk, run approach, etc. So there's a number of those approaches which are recommended in order to continue moving forward. I'm going to share a few of those. I also have a small customer case study on how Copilot, when integrated, when embedded, and when connected to the the data sources of value, can help improve business processes and bring efficiency. So, starting off with key factors, um, there's many, and just building on that theme of what Brian was talking about, there's a real question on the trust on the source of information and the ability within the Microsoft tool sets or within Copilot to be able to target or point Copilot to uh, the trusted information sources. And of course, there is a process to go through to identify the trusted information sources. In that context, what we are observing is is that now, having done those pilots where the risks are emerging, are really around um, what Copilot is able to access in private spaces, OneDrive, etc. Um, there is generally a level of control which we see is available, a level of access controls which are implemented in organizations when we talk about shared workspaces like SharePoint and Teams. But there is a general question mark on, well, what should we do about information which is stored in OneDrive for Business, and what does it mean if Vivek is interacting with Copilot? Copilot is bringing information which is stored within Brian's OneDrive for Business. So there is a number of those specific scenarios which are emerging, and we're kind of taking a management approach to this, because organizations who are seeing the value of Copilot, are not waiting for 6 months, 8 months projects to implement all of this, fantastic stuff which we always talk about on information governance, where your retention classifications need to be implemented, your files need to be sensitivity labeled, and your rot needs to be cleaned up, etc. The pace at which Copilot is getting adopted, it's less of a question of if, it's a question of when, and and how much of that adoption scale would be. This year we have seen majority of the organizations we have worked with and currently working with have done some form of a pilot activity. And now at a phase, what should we do in 2025 or the remaining of 2024? What's the right approach to scale from a pilot which we may have done with 300 users, or maybe as small as 10 users, 20 users, etc. But every single organization has done some level of pilot. And what we have seen is that what the statistics I shared previously is that roughly about 60% of organizations who did a pilot in 2024 have reported that the data remediation took significant time and effort, especially using the native features available within Microsoft 365. And if you are kind of like at an like a basic tier of what Microsoft would call as a licensing model, then that overall becomes quite quite a quite a difficult challenge. And the second point is, well, um, there's a lot of redundant, obsolete, trivial data, but we also have high value content which we want to protect. So where do we invest our energy and effort? Because we have limited amount of funds available, what should we do first? Should we focus our energy on getting rid of all the redundant, obsolete, trivial? That's a project in itself. Or should we identify high value content or sensitive content? And in that sensitive content, um, which one should we focus on? There's so many different categories of sensitive data, um, and from an access sharing perspective, there's a lot being written about overexposed information, overshared information. Which one of those categories do we need to really urgently um, put a resolution on, and and which problem are we trying to solve? Because as an IT organization, it's very difficult to make a unilateral decision on how information is shared across the organization. Those are kind of three key areas where we have looked at, where we have thought about what challenges customers are facing. And usually the target is within 5 to 6 weeks, we need to have some kind of foundational governance implemented so that um, we can at least be at a level of maturity that we can instill some confidence with privacy, with audit, with e-discovery, legal and cybersecurity, that we are in a position to activate Copilot. So there's a four-stage approach which we think kind of works quite well in this context. The first half of that, the two stages, we call them as what you need to be ready for Copilot, and and the remaining two stages is what we would call as what you need to manage Copilot. So something we kind of didn't mention so far in this presentation is this isn't just fixing it for once. Like we have always said with information governance, that it is a continuous process. So Copilot activation is a risk management activity, and that needs to be a continuous activity. And our objective is to cut it down into stages in manageable chunks, that to just activate something or to introduce a new piece of technology or a capability which the business wants, which they are anyway using outside of the organization, doesn't become a 1 year, 6 month, 8 month project. So what we've come up with is, first of all, a certain set of predefined controls, policies, which we would recommend are implemented in order to establish a basic foundation. And that would be, for example, introducing controls such as retention for interactions with your Copilot chats, such as introducing um, the data loss prevention controls, basic data loss prevention controls, which can be applied to the data which is being shared, um, accessed by Copilot, or the output which is generated, the net new content which is generated by Copilot can be managed accordingly. We appreciate that many organizations are still implementing some of the tooling which Microsoft is recommending, like sensitivity labels, etc. Um, but as part of that foundational governance, if you haven't implemented those classification capabilities like sensitivity labels um, or the basic data loss prevention capabilities, then turn those on with focus on the priority content, the priority sensitive content. It could be personal data, it could be financial data, depending on the type of organization you are. You would want to kind of identify that high priority content. You definitely need a classification. So if you don't have a classification scheme, some of those tools are quite difficult to implement. But that's the problem which we are trying to address here is that within that 5 week period, being able to do a level of data discovery, activate some of the recommended AI compliance policies. Um, InfoTection has developed a number of reports, and as part of the product InfoTection arm, which can be plugged in to be able to provide some analysis from within your Microsoft 365 tenant. Brian's talked about redundant, obsolete, trivial. Um, we can run that analysis within Microsoft 365 and through dashboards and reports, help you identify what percentage of the data within your Microsoft 365 platform would fall into that category of data which hasn't been accessed, includes file types, file extensions, and maybe keywords, etc., which would normally fall into the definition of data which is either expired or has gone beyond its life cycle. And then the more optimized stages for Copilot governance will include a little bit more work, and that would include, well, what is it that you would like to do with that redundant, obsolete, trivial, or even the important data, the high value content, which is important, which needs to be kept, which needs to be managed. Maybe it is active, maybe it is inactive, but it is of value to the organization. Where should that go? And so activating data lifecycle management, retention controls, etc., are quite important. And with the increasing cost of storage, there are also considerations on whether that data should actually stay within SharePoint Online, not necessarily driven by the Copilot requirements, but maybe there are storage optimization requirements. Um, and our objective as part of this is that in that 5 week period, we implement that foundational governance, that you are able to um, activate Copilot. There are security, data protection, centralized controls which are implemented, which can monitor the activity, and through InfoTection supplied add-ons for reporting and adoption measuring, we are then able to offer where the new risks are emerging. For example, specifically, we have reports which are able to investigate whether Copilot had access data in somebody's OneDrive for Business. So rather than actually giving a whole set of data, which is across SharePoint teams and other areas, which is, yes, it is shared with people outside of the team, but ability to prioritize out of those, which one is the most important. If you had a limited amount of time, where would you focus that effort on? On the next slide, I'm going to play a short video of a customer case study. It's a public case study. It will have an audio. Hopefully that comes through. It's only a short video, and then I will move on to some of the outcomes and action plan and some key takeaways.
Meet LSEG Data and Analytics, one of the world's largest providers of financial markets data and infrastructure. LSEG Analytics integrates with Microsoft Teams to provide an easy way for general discoverability of assets, saving time by interacting with LSEG SDK APIs using natural language in Copilot. Financial professionals can ask Copilot to help him run a scenario and assist with code snippet construction from Visual Studio Code, where the LSEG Analytics extension is also readily available. Thanks to the integration of LSEG Analytics SDK, Visual Studio Code, and Microsoft Teams, financial professionals can efficiently analyze scenarios, collaborate effectively, and stay ahead in the competitive financial market.
So that was a short video. I apologize. There was some feedback. You may have heard feedback or double audio. But the objective of showing this case study was that there are organizations who have invested in that foundational governance, have curated the data sources from where they would like to generate the value by implementing solutions like Copilot. And in this example, have also leveraged capabilities such as Copilot Studio to be able to extend and go beyond what I was referring to initially, the two use cases, knowledge extraction and knowledge creation. And this is a scenario where that knowledge extraction and knowledge creation is embedded into a business process where certain activities and certain decisions can be made. And through those extensions, they are embedded into a business process. So that was a little bit more of an advanced scenario, a very early adopter organization. We've been working for a while in getting Copilot embedded into their business processes. The foundation for all of that is going back to the data. And while that seems like a very long journey, what we are trying to do with this effort is to create some outcomes like this. For example, there's an outcome that we create through our reporting capabilities of the initial discovery, where we are able to identify the teams, the sites, user accounts, etc., where the information which is stored can potentially create risks, and the way it is shared with people in the organization could potentially create risk when Copilot is activated for those users. And what would be the specific recommendations? For example, some low-hanging fruits for many organizations would be empty workspaces where there is some information or maybe no information and they haven't been accessed, but nobody has deleted those sites. A lot of the times that information is just not available to the hand. So being able to access that information in a dashboard like this with specific instructions, you can then take the action of deleting those sites. Of course, the sites which have content, which have some activity, may be inactive for a while. You may need to communicate. You may need to work with your business before you can actually take an action of deleting them. But one of the things that you can do is still before you actually make the decision or actually take the action of deleting, you could exclude them from Copilot. If those sites or if those workspaces are reported as inactive or no longer in use. A high level action plan, as I said, it's very difficult to think of all of this remediation when net new information is still getting generated within the platform, is to look at maybe a 30-day plan. Start with a small pilot. As I said, we are helping customers with generating those reports where there is discovery information available, the risks are identified. Based on those risks, a remediation plan can be established. And then a 3-month process for addressing some of those high risks and prioritizing them in relation to the demand which is being generated within your organization regarding Copilot licenses. Finally, some key recommendations. Information governance is an important topic. you really need to invest in that. Although we appreciate that if you are starting right now and you're looking to implement Copilot, you can't implement all of that information governance recommended practices within a short period of time. But use Copilot as an opportunity to make investments into information governance. What we've seen is with all the pilots we've done so far is that hardly, except a few organizations, recommendation is, and given where organizations are with the data quality, data maturity, is to right size the Copilot deployments through multiple pilots. Evaluate the demand, evaluate the use cases after the initial pilot, and then roll out business by business, use case by use case, instead of doing a single transaction and just activating it for everybody. So manage your risks accordingly, prioritize your risks, and then go ahead with the Copilot deployment and activation. And of course, engage with partners. We definitely see the value of working with partners like in protection, Microsoft, and other Microsoft partners as well, who have the in-depth understanding of what's the right way and what's the most appropriate and maybe sometimes the quickest way to implement a number of these controls, which don't just get switched on when you implement Copilot. They have to be switched on, they have to be configured, and there are more than one ways to configure those. Final thought before I pause for any final thoughts from Brian as well, and anybody else. If there are any questions, we will check on that. Final call to action. You can request 1 week foundational governance within protection, and as part of that, we implement our solution called iArm, which is an extension and a set of reporting capabilities initially to help you understand your data and um, identify where, based on the rules that we have built in the solution, the most important risks in context of your data, and what would be the recommendations to implement, and how many of those recommendations you should implement before you activate Copilot, and how many of those recommendations need to be activated as part of a project-based activity because it requires business change communication and alignment with the rest of the business. And as IT or even as legal, you wouldn't be able to take those decisions just by yourself. On that note, we have 5 minutes left. I wanted to invite Brian. Any final thoughts that you would like to share with everybody on this call?
Well, it's kind of a small one, but it's an interesting one, I guess. I realize that sometimes in life we get a little too accustomed to abbreviations for things. And for those of you who didn't pick up on it, LSEG stands for the London Stock Exchange Group. It's one of our larger clients. And the point really is that very large financial institutions, as well as a lot of our other very, very large clients, are in the process of adopting this and addressing these issues. So you're in good company.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And my final thought would be the first step is always to understand the risks. And in my experience, every single customer I've worked with, taking a risk management approach has a familiarity, because every organization understands the concept and have practices and procedures for risk management. And activating Copilot is, of course, it's a huge opportunity. We're seeing a huge traction in the market where people are seeing the value in Copilot. But there's a risk associated with that as well, that if we don't position it right, we have also seen scenarios where many organizations have not been able to create a business case beyond the smaller pilot that they have done, because it hasn't really integrated into their business process beyond just summarizing Teams meetings or beyond just summarizing their emails or summarizing documentations. It really has got to fit in with your business process, and that sometimes needs a discussion and a use case based approach. So try and bring those familiar risk management approaches, use case based approaches, persona based approaches, which are sort of more familiar territories. Otherwise, Copilot and generative AI um, is such a new concept that a lot of organizations um, would struggle with otherwise, if it is not brought into that familiar domain for them. So hopefully that makes sense. I haven't seen any specific questions coming into the chat. I'll have a quick look.
No, I'm not saying anything.
Okay, I think that leaves us with a couple of minutes before the end of the session. I want to thank you everyone who joined and everybody who stayed till the last minute. We will share the recording and the presentation with you. And once again, Brian, thank you very much for sharing your experience. I hugely appreciate you coming and doing this so early in the morning.
No problem. Thank you all.
Okay,
Appreciate your
thank you.
attendance.